Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healer specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing?
I am exceptionally well. Thanks for asking, Rory. Rory and I are delighted that you've joined us for episode 287 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. 3 items on today's menu, starting off with ethical, sustainable practice, where we're going to be delving into the world of adoption, counselling for adoption. There has been, this is breaking news, dun, 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 dun. There has been an update to legislation late December 2023. We're going to be telling you what that is all about. But also today we're going to be looking at Practice Matters, and we have a really special interview with Julie Naylor, who is a long-term friend of Counselling Tutor, and we're going to be speaking about exploring the accreditation process. Julie is going through this process at the moment. She's going to be speaking from a position of actually being in this process. Lots to learn there. And then we're going to go into our last section for today, which is student services, where we're going to be speaking about joining a professional body from a student's perspective. And we're going to have a conversation around why you are asked to join an ethical body and what choices you have. What kind of a say do you as a student have in the choices of ethical body? But let's get started with ethical, sustainable practice, where we recognize that as practitioners, a lot of the learning happens post our formal training. You know, we go on, we do specialist training, or we do CPD, or we learn about running our practice or scaling our practice. And today, breaking news, Rory, about counselling for adoption. Fill us in. What's happening?
Yeah, so just before everybody went off on their festive break or the holiday season, Christmas as it's sometimes known, there was an announcement by the BACP to say that there'd been a change to the 2010 legislation regarding working with clients who come for adoption issues. So let me frame this in context. The first thing is what I'm going to be speaking about today is for England. Yeah, if you're in Wales, if you're listening in Wales, or you're listening in Northern Ireland or in Scotland, I will speak to that as I go through this kind of information that we're sharing. And if you're listening in the rest of the world, please hang on, because there's going to be information that's going to be useful if you are working with clients who are coming to you specifically for adoption. So with that said, let's just go back to 2010. And in 2010, there was an amendment to the Children's Act of 2002. And basically, that amendment said that legally, if you were a counsellor in England and a client came to you and wanted to speak about adoption, specifically about being adopted, the feelings they had about being adopted, then you had to be registered with Ofsted. Now, Ofsted are usually known as the educational kind of quality check. People be going to schools and that type of thing to make sure that the teaching's up to standard and the school or colleges are up to standard. But that was the law in 2010. And if you wanted to work specifically with that cohort of clients, the usual path would be to go to an agency such as Bernardo's, do some training, become registered and work through the agency. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, if you go to Counselling Tutor, the website, go to our podcast tab and look for episode 247. I interviewed Samantha Shield, who was a Ofsted registered adoption therapist. And she tells you all about what you have to do to become registered with Ofsted. So moving forward into the present day, the law has actually changed. There's been an amendment to the law. And I'm going to read out what the BACP said in their press release, because the BAC put this out. And they said, we are absolutely thrilled to hear that the government has removed the Ofsted registration requirement for adult adoptees, birth mothers, and adoptive parents. We've no doubt this change in legislation will significantly increase access to therapy and help more people at a time when they need it most. Now, why this is quite a big thing is because up until the change of legislation, people who wanted to speak to therapists specifically about adoption issues had to go through a very small cohort of people who were trained. It really reduced choice. Now, by the look of it, those people are able now to access any therapist. But there is a bit of a caveat to this. If you want to counsel for adoption, and I'm talking about specific adoption issues, someone comes to you and they've given a child up for adoption, someone who comes and they want to speak about their experience of being adopted, maybe adoptive parents who want to speak about adoption issues, then you would have had a very small cohort. Now you've got quite a huge cohort of therapists to work with. If you're over 18, if you're working with children, you still have to be registered. But if anybody over 18 can really choose their own therapist now, that's what the guidance is saying in England. However, the caveats are that really, if you're working with adoption issues, you should be trained in trauma, early trauma, developmental trauma, attachment. You should have a really good understanding of the adoption mechanism, how children are adopted, how that works. Because, and I don't want to labour the point here, but adoption can be quite a traumatic process for the mother, the mother or the parents who give up the child themselves, and of course those people who are offering adoption services. So you really do need specific training. Now, this is the guidance for England. Now, if you're in Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, usually what happens is that you provide those services as a adoption therapist via an agency. Although the BACP, I did notice today when I did some research, has offered guidance in Scotland saying you should really contact your local council. So my best advice is, or observation, because we're not, Ken and myself never say we're experts in these areas. It is quite an in-depth area, this, is to speak with your professional body. If you're thinking of working with someone who is an adoptee and wants to speak about adoption issues, then the best thing to do, I think, is to speak to your professional body, be that, the UKCP, BACP, and CPS, whichever professional body you're with, and get a view. Also speak with your insurance company. That's really, really important as well. But it does speak to the fact that this is a fairly welcome change in legislation, Ken, because it does allow clients to access a bigger cohort of therapists. And autonomy, as we know, is so important in counselling. Now, I just want to say a little bit about what happens if you're working with somebody who it comes to you, and then as you're working through the therapy, they talk about adoption-related issues. Well, the guidance says that you don't have to register if an adoption-related issue only emerges after counselling begins and is not the primary area of focus. So if you're working, the way I read that legislation, if you're working with a child under the age of 18 and they come to you, and then they may come to you because they have anxiety or they're depression or they've got, whatever issues that people present within counselling, they just want to kind of get a sense of the life. And then they disclose that they are adopted. Then you unless you're working specifically with the adoption issue, you don't have to stop and refer them on, because that was what had to happen legally in the past. If you were working with somebody and all of a sudden they said, "Oh, by the way, I'm adopted," then technically you had to refer them on. You had to stop and refer them on, which is never great for the client's journey. So I think that's useful. And what I'd say, please share this information. Now, we do have a handout. It's going to be a very comprehensive handout. And you can get that by going to Counselling Tutor, the website. Go to episode 287, and you'll find a handout there. Download it, and it's full of information. Please share that handout widely. Please point people to this podcast, because it's a significant change in the law. And you know what, Ken? I bet that there's very few therapists who even knew about the 2010 legislation, or even supervisors. The amounts of people I speak to on a daily basis, when it comes up, they go, "I never knew that. I never knew that." It is really a bit of hidden legislation, Ken.
It is, and it was certainly outside of my awareness until we started looking at it in Counselling Tutor, until we had our guest that we brought in episode 247. Use your podcast app and go and listen to that app, because it's really covered in a lot of detail by Samantha and Rory. The handout is very useful. Rory's told you where you get that. Counselling Tutor website, podcast tab, episode 287. The show notes are there. You can download it. The big takeaways for me is that, that ignorance is not an excuse when it comes to the law. Legislation is the law. It's part of our professional requirement that we keep up to date with the law. We're asked to, in our ethical frameworks, we're asked to. So we need to kind of know about this stuff. I think it's reassuring that maybe on session 4 or 5, if a client does now bring up the topic of adoption, when you're deep in the meat of the session with this person and it wasn't their primary presenting issue. In other words, what I mean by that is they didn't come to you and say, "I want to come and speak to you because I want to speak about my adoption," or an adoption that we've adopted, or anything adoption related. It comes out later in the session. It's relieving to me that you can continue to work with that client and that there isn't a need to refer on. I think that the widening of that gate is encouraging. It certainly stands outside of my wheelhouse, as it were. So I would recommend that you get Rory's handout on that. Look through it, and again, as Rory has said, share that with your colleagues, because it's such an important topic, and we need to have an understanding of what's happening in our sector. And if you're outside of the UK, Rory, what do you do?
Well, I think if you're outside of the UK, you might want to look at the professional protocols in the area that you're in. But I think the big takeaway for me is that if you're going to work with adoption-related issues, then in my view, and I'm really clear about this, you're going to need to know about child development, developmental trauma. You're going to have an understanding of the process of adoption, how it works, what the legal mechanisms are. You're going to have an understanding of attachment. And I also think that you probably need to be a bit introspective as well, because this work can be very, very difficult. Working with someone who's been adopted, not all the time, can be very difficult. It may even speak to yourself and your own history. So I think you need to be fairly I don't know, I'd say introspective and be able to understand how that process may impact on you. But as I say, my takeaways is if you are working with people who have been adopted, definitely get the training. There are specific training courses you can go on, but certainly an understanding of developmental trauma is just absolutely essential, Ken.
It is. And you mentioned supervision during kind of as you were outlining this, and if you're a supervisor and you listen, regular listener to the Counselling Tutor podcast, thank you for that. We hope that we will inform you in service of your supervisees, and if your supervisee should mention adoption or a client that came for adoption, you now have this information to be able to help and guide them. But I also wanted to expand on that, and if you look to your ethical frameworks, it suggests that a practitioner should seek supervision from a supervisor who is trained in the modality and the way of working, and perhaps if you are a practitioner, you are working with adoption, that you are in the right you have the right support around you. You should be working with a supervisor who understands this as well and who can help and guide you. The supervision process is about shedding light, and we're not there to educate our supervisors. It's the supervisors who are there to kind of help us and our clients along the way. So I think that is an important recognition here, that if you are a supervisor, there maybe is an extra area of development and learning and a course that you can support that very specialist niche of practitioners who do work with adoption, because there are adoption support agencies out there, and they're going to need practitioners, and they're going to need supervisors as well.
It's also useful, I think, Ken, to have this on your intake form. So when you do your intake with clients and you're asking specific questions, have that question, is there any areas of adoption you want to speak about? Because that then opens another conversation about what they might want to explore. Certainly if it's a child client, definitely, because remember, you still have to be registered in England if you're working with anyone under 18. So if you're a child therapist, have a look at your intake form, make sure that question is on your intake form, so that you can, if necessary, refer at the point of contact, rather than make any referral when you're well into the therapy session. I think that's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Rory. And I think one final thought as we kind of go out of this topic is, if you are a practitioner working with adoption and you've had specialist training, or you're going on that specialist training to work within that niche, it's worth speaking to your insurer as well, because there is legislation around working with counselling adoption. Let your insurer know, so there's no surprises with them. It's ethical body, supervisor, insurer. Make sure that you have those ticked off. And of course, disclaimer, as Rory said at the beginning, we're not the experts on this. We're really not. We do the research, the information that is provided on this podcast and in the handout is gathered from government guidance and discussions with practitioners who are practicing registered and trained adoption therapists, and it should be treated as general information. We're not advising you, we're not guiding you, but we are raising this topic, and we hope that you will find it interesting. Go and get that handout, counsellingtutor.com, podcast tab. Today's episode 287. Go and download it. It's really worth having on file. And that kind of brings us to the end of ethical sustainable practice, and we move out of that today and right into practice matters. Julie Naylor spoke with Rory about exploring the accreditation process.
Yes, indeed. And this has been driven by a huge amount of discussion in our Facebook group about becoming accredited and what one needs to do to become an accredited therapist, certainly here in the UK. I spoke with Julie Naylor, who is going through the accreditation process. And just a quick reminder, I nearly forgot to mention it. If you want to join our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, and you'll find us, and you can see lots of conversations going on. And I caught up with Julie Naylor, and this is what she had to say about her journey into accreditation.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
In episode 279 of the podcast, we talked about accreditation, certainly in the aspects of the new Scope Ed framework that's coming out, that counsellors and psychotherapists seem to have been asked to work to. So it's my great pleasure to actually interview someone who's going through the accreditation process. A bit of a spoiler here, the person I'm interviewing is a mate of mine. We've known each other for a very, very long time. And it's my great pleasure to welcome Julie Naylor from Julie Naylor Counselling. So Julie, it's lovely to see you.
Hello, Rory. Lovely to see you too, as always.
So, the only reason I'm laughing is that Julie's gurning on me in the video feed. So, so on a serious note, Julie, you just tell us a little bit about your training journey to get to where you are today.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I started counselling training. I spent some time, I don't know if you remember this, Rory, with some support from a friend, you, thinking about which route I should take into counselling. And I decided that I would go the diploma route because for me it was important to get that experiential kind of hands-on feel really to my counselling training. I wanted as much experience actually doing the work as I could get. So I started at level 2, did the year at level 2, then did a year at level 3, and then the 2 years of level 4 where I did my placement and worked with kind of real life clients, if you will. So yeah, that was my route into this field.
Yeah, and I seem to remember, Julie, that the course you did, it was a level 4, but it was a BACP accredited course. So that made you hop over what's called the certificate of proficiency test. So you didn't have to do what a lot of practitioners have to do when they come to join, certainly the BACP. I think it's only the BACP that do this, and other ethical bodies are available. I think I should say that. And you have to do an external test to become a full member of the BACP, from moving to a student member to what they call MBACP, which is the full membership. And then on you've got, from what I could gather, a thriving private practice.
Yeah. So I carried on, at my placement. I love my placement, so I worked for them for a little while. And yeah, then I've got a private practice now, Rory, which I absolutely love. I love my private practice work, and yeah, that's what I do now. Yes.
And I guess that brings us on to the reason for this interview is that you recently decided to go for accreditation with the BACP. So I guess what people would be interested in is what prompted you to go for accreditation. Was it Scope Ed and the dreaded, columns, or was there another reason? What was your reason?
Do you know, Rory, I think I'd be lying if I said that Scope Ed wasn't kind of at least in the background of my mind with the dreaded column. Absolutely. And I think for me as well, there's something around the kind of in counselling at the moment, kind of how qualified are you? Well, you need this, or are you qualified to this degree level, or to a master's level, or a PhD level, or whatever it might be, and whether that's just an internal thing for me. That the kind of level 4 diploma route seems to be, the kind of least qualified that you can be to be a therapist. I do a lot of CPD. I'm always doing it. I love it. And I've done a lot of courses. But yeah, there was something around that for me, that prompted me to go for accreditation, along with the columns, in all honesty, Rory, I'm going to be honest again, I can't be anything but not really knowing how that's going to pan out in the future, the columns and where I'll stand in that, and what that might mean for me. In my private practice, I work with a whole host of people, and often there's a lot of trauma, and people come carrying trauma, as lots of us do. I just, that was something that was living for me. Like I wouldn't like to be in a position where I'd have to potentially stop working with certain people if I didn't fit in a certain column.
Yeah.
That was a thing for
and
me.
I think that's the worry for everybody. And before people start panicking, I think I'll just outline what the scope framework is. It's short for scope of education. It's been agreed by, I think it's 5 professional bodies, and off the top of my head, I think that's BACP, UKCP, NCPS, Association of Christian Counsellors. I think the Human Givens Institute may be in there, Institute of Psychoanalysis. So there are lots of professional bodies that oversee therapists and have their own terms of guidance, their own professional guidance. And in an unregulated world, because in UK counselling isn't a regulated profession, they've kind of taken the mantle of that, and they produced this agreement between the ethical bodies of what's called a scope of education, and you fall into 3 categories. Now, I have to say, at the time of recording this, which is November of 2023, it's not completely clear what those categories are going to be. And you've alluded to the fact that you might, if you're not accredited, you might not be able to work with certain clients. That was a worry for you. There's no evidence, I have to say, of that at the moment. You're, your reasoning, you're just giving us your reasoning. That's what you're thinking. But I have to say, as the host, there's no evidence that that's going to be the case. So that brings us on to, Julie, how did you find the accreditation process? What did you have to do?
Yeah, and again, I'm glad you said that, Rory, actually, because I probably should have said that from the beginning. This is just me. That these are my thoughts, my feelings, my opinions, and and it's important that when I say how I found the accreditation process as well, that this is coming from me. It's not, other people will have completely different experiences of this process than I will. But I can only speak for myself and from myself, really. So how did I find the accreditation process? I found it a challenge, Rory. I found it really challenging. I found it challenging, and I also found it quite enlightening in different parts also. So, for me, being a private practitioner, sometimes I don't work for EAPs at the moment, but sometimes, there might be a time in the future where I need to, I don't know. So a lot or some of the EAPs, you require accreditation. So that was another driver for me. Maybe that would be an insurance for me, if I need to use the EAPs. And so I set about the process of accreditation. And in all honesty, I found it challenging, not doing the work, but trying to decipher what they wanted me to do. What they were kind of asking of me. That's what I found a challenge, Rory. And I'll kind of be really honest again and say, you know me, Rory, that's the way my brain is sometimes. I do have a tendency to kind of not just accept something. Like, oh, but what about that? Does it mean this? Or maybe it might mean all these other things. I kind of go around the houses and, maybe overcomplicate things, overthink things, even though I don't like to kind of refer to myself as overdoing something. But yeah, that's my natural tendency. And just like you, having been a lecturer in the past, I know about marking schemes and kind of what people are looking for and which keywords to look at to make sure I'm hitting the criteria. But I found it a real challenge in the accreditation process, Rory, to do that, or to find those keywords, or to kind of ascertain what they wanted me to write about. And on that, in a similar vein, really, I can speak a lot and I can also write a lot. So I found it a real challenge to get what they needed in such a small word count. Because I've got a lot about counting, I'm passionate about it, I love it, So I found it a challenge to kind of put it into these succinct boxes when I wasn't even sure what the boxes were asking me to do or be. So that was really challenging. That was a challenging side of it. And the enlightening part of it was I really, really, really enjoyed the fact that I was able to get back right to the kind of nub of the work that we do. This is about my modality, how I work. And I think sometimes when we've done our initial training, definitely for me, kind of I veered off in lots of directions and done lots of different things. So to come right back and really hone in on those kind of core and key areas and philosophies of your practice was a really enlightening thing. It made me feel quite anchored into who I am as a practitioner and what I do. So yeah, it was a real mixed bag of emotions and challenges going through that process. It really was.
Yeah, and I think what's really interesting about this is that to get into that column B, you have to buy it through accreditation. Now, there was talk that certain ethical bodies may look at other routes to get into column B. I'm not sure what that looks like, or even if that is going to be a thing. But there was discussion at the instigation of Sculpt that there was going to be a different routes into the columns. Now, whether that still stands or whether it's purely going to be on an accreditation, who knows? And I also hear that one of the things that you seem to have realised, it got you back to the fundamentals of your practice. It took you right back to the fundamentals and asked you real kind of key questions about how you work within that modality.
Yeah. And that was really important for me, Rory, because I remember, I'm sure I rang you at one point and I said, these things that we do in our practice, it's almost like second nature to us now. It's almost second nature to me, like I would kind of sit this way or speak this way or do these things and actually having to write about those things and actually recall them and share them. There's a case study part was really important because it really allowed me to reflect on and to sit with the power of it. Yes. and how meaningful it all is in it, in the little parts that make up the whole experience. So I'm being really honest there, saying I did really enjoy that part of the process, Rory, that I'd kind of not forgotten about because I do it all the time, but I'd not really shone a light on it. In any detail for a while. So that was really nice. That was a nice thing.
Yeah, and as I said, this is an interview about someone who's doing accreditation. It's not a pro or anti-accreditation. It's just the process. What was useful in terms of support doing this? There'll be a lot of people listening thinking, "Oh, that sounds a bit daunting." What support did you reach out for, and what was the most helpful?
Well, without a shadow of a doubt, my supervisor. My supervisor is. I talked to my supervisor for quite a while before I was even, before Sculpt was even a thing, actually, Rory. I was kind of saying, I've got to get this accreditation done at some point. But my supervisor has supported a lot of supervisees through the process. And so I had some extra sessions with her. And she was really great with me, actually, Rory. She knows what I'm like. She was always on the other end of an email or a phone, if I was kind of going, this is all too much. I'm tying myself in knots with this. So my supervisor, who has helped put other people through the process, was a huge support to me in it, definitely. Yeah.
Did you reach out to the ethical body, the BACP, at all for any form of support, or use their helpline or anything to ask any questions, or go to any of their? I believe they have webinars, accreditation webinars from time to time. Did you use any of that to support you?
I didn't, Rory. No, I didn't. I looked. They've got on their accreditation page, which I know it's paused now until February, but they've got some videos and some kind of examples of, so it'll give you the question and then it will say what we're doing here is we want you to talk about this, this, and this. And there's some little videos that accompany them. So I watched those and I went onto that page, to kind of try to decipher, exactly what was needed.
Yeah. And I think, to be fair, we're talking about one ethical body. Different ethical bodies have different ways of accreditation. I think they're all pretty much a submitted portfolio of work. And I guess finally the question, do you think the process of becoming accredited has made you a better therapist? And do you think your clients are looking or are interested if you are accredited or not?
In all honesty, Rory, no. And no. In short, but there's never a short answer here with me, is that do I think it's made me a better therapist? No, I don't think it's made me a better therapist. Do I think it gave me a reflective period of time where I could kind of reconnect with the fundamentals, which was nice for me? Yes. Do I think clients would care? In short, honestly, Rory, the answer is just a no.
Yeah.
The answer is just a no. When I see private practice clients, I will, as part of my kind of, not assessment, but my initial call, I'll kind of say, oh, how did you hear about me? Or what made you choose me? And it's never been anything to do with the qualifications that I have or don't have, or, I don't think it's ever been that in the whole time that I've been doing this now. So yeah, that's my honest answer.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because when we do any work, it's always about the impact on clients and the helping better the outcomes for clients. So I think that's an interesting reflection. And of course, should you be successful, you'll sit in the column B, and I will sit next to you in column A, because I've been qualified for just short of 20 years, and I've never done my accreditation, and I understand your principle for doing it. That's brilliant. And I guess it comes down to everybody has a view. Everybody has a view. And some people feel they should do it, and some other people feel they couldn't. I guess what the crux of the matter is if work and employment will depend on it. And I think that will be, probably the driver eventually for if people want to become accredited. But Julie, it's always a pleasure talking to you. It's a little bit more formal on the podcast. We usually have a good natter on the phone. But Julie Naylor, thank you for joining us.
Big thank you to Julie Naylor. Big thank you to you, Rory, for holding the important discussions, and hopefully that was of service to you if you're considering accreditation, going through that process, or if you're post-accreditation. Does that match with how it is for you? That's one person's journey and a discussion, but how was it for you? And maybe go to that Facebook page, Counselling Tutor Facebook page, and go and join in that discussion. We're now moving on to our student services. Student services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Have you ever wondered if you're using counselling skills effectively? Confidentiality means we rarely see skills used by others, so it's no wonder that so many students say they lack confidence in their counselling skills. That's why I built Counselling Skills Academy. Counselling Skills Academy is an online course that you can do at your own pace. It will give you the skills competence and confidence to know that you're using your skills most effectively. You will see real counselling skills used by a counsellor in real life sessions, covering everything from how risk is assessed right through to working towards an appropriate ending. Visit counselingskillsacademy.com to learn more and to claim your counselling tutor discount. That's counselingskillsacademy.com. Today in Student Services, we're going to be looking at joining a professional body, and this is from a student's perspective. We want to have that conversation around the why we need to join an ethical body and what kind of choice you might have as a student, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And it's about this time of year. This podcast will be going out in the January of 2024, and it's about this time of year where tutors are now saying to their students, look, you're ready to go into practice. You've got your fitness to practice letter. You need to get your insurance, and you need to join a professional body or an ethical body. It is sometimes known as ethical bodies. And I think I want to make a point here. There isn't a hierarchy of ethical bodies. There is a bit of a hierarchy, and that is that all the ethical bodies, and I think there's about 8 of them, are part of what's called the Professional Standards Authority. So if you think of a triangle, and right at the top of that triangle is the Professional Standards Authority, which is a government organisation, and they hold a register of people who are therapists. So the idea is that when you join an ethical body, your name goes onto that register. And then if you leave and join another ethical body, that ethical body then checks that register to make sure you've not been struck off from the ethical body you've left. And, up until that happened, there were people hopping off one ethical body because they've been banned and then joining another ethical body and practicing away. So the top of the pyramid is the Professional Standards Authority. So any ethical body you join should be registered with what's called a PSA, which then brings us to which body you should join. And I think I'm going to say a few words about why tutors ask students to join an ethical body, and that's to do with employability. If you go to get a job with an outside company, be it the NHS, be it a private provider of healthcare, they will ask you, are you a member of a professional body? Because it provides external accountability. And the ethical bodies that most people can join, if you're doing a counselling course, if you're at college or you're doing in a private institution doing a counselling course, you can join the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, which is very well known, or you can join the National Counselling and Psychotherapeutic Society, which again are becoming better known and a very popular choice. If you're doing a psychotherapy course, so in other words, you're doing maybe a 5 or 6 year training in psychotherapy, then usually the route is to join the UKCP, which is the United Kingdom Council for Psychotherapy. And they're also kind of side. I use that very thoughtfully. You could join the Association of Christian Counsellors, which is a specific ethical body for those who have a faith position and counsel as well. So think about which ethical body you want to join. The PSA, the top of the pyramid, is the important thing here. And I don't know about you, Ken, but if I was teaching again, I think I'd give my students a choice of which ethical body to join. I wouldn't dictate they'd had to join one or the other. I would say, part of a research project, find out which one you want to join and why.
Yeah, very much so. We live in an age now of choice and information being freely available online. And I say this often, as a student going into placement, where you have a client in front of you for the first time, from the very second that you sit down in front of a client, a real client, you're in practice. You are in practice. And that practice is your practice. Even if you're working through an agency, a placement agency, it's still you in practice, your practice. And your practice is about who you are and what is the right fit for you and the clients that you're going to serve. And part of that decision is who you are going to choose as your professional body, who you wish to align yourself with. You're going to pay a fee to be a member of a professional body, and some of the professional bodies will offer, most of the professional bodies will offer a discount for student memberships. In the same way as we speak about going into a placement, one of the things that's most important is checking that it's the right placement for you, checking that they have the right support around you to support you during your placement journey. The same is true of your professional body or ethical body. You are entitled to find out what membership benefits they're going to offer you. You know, you're paying for this. How do they support you? What do they have on offer? Do they have documents and papers? Do they have any kind of training that you can key into? So have a look and familiarize yourself with what the different ethical bodies have to offer you. And there is sometimes a misconception, and we've spoken about this on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We've had guests come in and speak about this on the Counselling Tutor Podcast. There is a misconception that if you are aligned with one particular ethical body, your chances of getting work are higher than if you were with a different ethical body. And that is a misconception. As Rory has pointed out, the ethical bodies fall under the PSA, the Professional Standards Authority. It is the Professional Standards Authority that oversees how and what happens. And as long as you are under the PSA, your ethical body is as valid no matter which one you choose. But the important part is check, if you're in the United Kingdom, that it is aligned with the PSA, because there are some interest or niche companies or organizations, I'm going to say, that will kind of take a certain sector and say, we specialize in this and we want to represent counsellors who practice in these areas. And they might just be an organization. They're not necessarily an ethical body. And to check if it's an ethical body, the question is, are they aligned with PSA, Professional Standards Authority? If they are, then your employment opportunities should be equal, no matter which PSA approved ethical or professional body you join for your counselling and psychotherapy. Now, to understand the PSA and how that kind of filters down to the different ethical bodies, it's the PSA that set certain standards that need to be adhered to. So I'm going to use this as an example of saying, what is the best style of counselling or modality of counselling? Is it person-centered? Is it CBT? You know, we could debate that day in and day out. But here's the thing. No matter what modality of counselling that you practice, you're going to adhere to a set of standards. You're going to hold confidentiality. You're going to work within legislation. So there are certain similarities that are going to span all of the modalities of counselling. And the same is true of the ethical bodies. If they're aligned with the PSA, it's the PSA that kind of set those minimum standards or the standards that we need to reach, and it doesn't matter which ethical body you are with. So the choice lies with you. And you mentioned, Rory, that why do students get asked to join a professional body? Well, very often the course provider, whether that be a university or if it's a CPCAB course or if it is a private service provider, the provider themselves will set a requirement that before you can become client-facing, you must be a member of an ethical body. And why? Because it is in protection of the clients at the end of the day. You know, an ethical body will suggest to you that you need to have a certain amount of supervision. Outside of that professional body, maybe you wouldn't go for that supervision, and therefore your own process wouldn't be overseen. So then how can you be in best service of the client? So at the end of the day, the ethical bodies are there to kind of help us with a framework that we follow and work within, be of best service to our clients. And it is the ethical bodies that will undertake research projects to understand what is considered best practice and how we can best serve. And in this very podcast, 287, that you're listening to right now, our very first topic, we started off by mentioning a recent update that came from an ethical body. Rory read it out. It was from the BACP, and it was the changes in working with those that are adopted, or the adoption process. So the ethical bodies do that research. They keep their ears to the ground, as it were. They look at what's happening at the very high levels, maybe in Parliament, and how the land is laid out, I guess, and where we're heading.
Of the land.
The lie of the land. I like that, Rory. So that's kind of the reason we keep ourselves ethical, and we keep ourselves in service by aligning with an ethical body. But the main point here is it's your choice. It should be your choice. And if it's not within your learning institution, inquire why. And it may well be a good reason. So, for example, if you are on a specific BACP accredited course, chances are they're going to say, hey, now is the time you join up the BACP. But you would have known that when you started that course. You would have been joining it knowing that. So there can be good reasons why they may not give a choice, and it would be a kind of one option. But if you're on a general course, ask the question if you feel that you should have a choice, and do the research and find out what's the best fit for you, Rory.
Absolutely. And I think joining the community of practice is a really good thing anyway, because it can be quite an isolating occupation being a therapist. Even if you work for an organization, ultimately, it's you and the client, or you and your supervisor. And joining the community of practice, where you can meet other people, you can see what the trends are in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. You can get yourself updated to the latest ethical protocols. I've spoken through the years to one or two therapists who said, well, I'm not a member of ethical body, but I use their ethical framework. And it's like, no, because, the ethical framework is there. So a client, should they be unhappy with the service they receive, can point to an area of the ethical framework or make a complaint to the ethical body. The ethical body can look through the code of ethics or the code of conduct and say, well, actually, I don't think that therapist has adhered to that particular standard that we set out in ethical protocols. And then obviously the therapist is then called to account, and it gives accountability. And I think having that little Jiminy Cricket person on your shoulder, that little invisible voice that says, am I doing the right thing here? I think is useful. I think he's really, really useful. But joining the community of practice, seeing the big world and the wider world of therapists working, the different areas they work in, Ken mentioned modalities, areas of the law, specialisms, I think is a really good thing if you're formulating your practice. If you're going through professional formulation, you eventually graduate, and then you're at the point, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to specialize? Am I going to be in general practice? We've become a grown-up profession over the years. We really have. And we stand with our colleagues in the medical profession, side by side, that they see us as fellow professionals. So I think joining an ethical body or professional body is a really good idea. But choice, as Ken said, choice is the thing. Which one fits for you the best? Which gives you the best value for money, the best service? Which one do you believe is going to help you develop your practice and get you where you need to be in service of your clients?
100%. And when you make your first visit to your supervisor, you find a new supervisor, one of the first questions they're going to ask is what ethical body you belong to. If you go for insurance, for your practice insurance, one of the first questions they're going to ask you is, who is your ethical body? Which ethical framework do you align yourself with? If you go for a placement, the chances are really high that the placement interview may ask you what ethical body you are a member of. So it's a common question. There are certain organizations and there are certain jobs that counsellors cannot do without being a member of an ethical body. And indeed, then within the ethical bodies, as Julie Naylor was speaking about in Practice Matters, the section just before this one on the Counselling Tutor podcast, there is room to move within your ethical body, room to grow within a structured process that is set in place by the ethical bodies to kind of reward your service, that how many years you've been counselling, and to kind of evidence that you kind of have been working and continue to work to best practices, you know. And there are certain employers that would look for an accredited person within an ethical body. So there is a lot of value there. And I think, you know, we have to look at the other side of this coin, Rory. We can't speak about this without mentioning that there are those that choose not to join an ethical body for choices that are their own. And this topic that we are discussing now is in no way standing in judgment of anybody's choice, whatever your choices may be. But we're having the talk. We're speaking to students at the moment as we speak about student services, and chances are you're going to come across this in your course. So hopefully this has been useful for you. So this is it. This is Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 287.
Yes, and we started with ethical, sustainable practice and the breaking news of a change of law in counselling for adoption. If you've heard this, make sure you share the podcast far and wide, and certainly share the handout with everyone you know in the therapy world. Speak to your supervisor about it, because as I said at the top of the podcast, it's a little known piece of legislation. Let's get it widely known and get it out there. We moved on then to interview Julie Naylor, going through the accreditation process in Practice Matters. She talks about what it takes and what you need to do to become accredited. And then finally, we ended up on student services, and kind of myself chewed the fat on joining a professional body and the choices that should be laid in front of students about which body they join and which body is a good fit. And before you close out today's episode, I've got a couple of quick favours to ask you, the listener. First, if you've enjoyed and benefited from our conversation today, please leave us a 5-star review on whichever platform you're tuning in from. It genuinely helps us reach more ears and grow our community. And secondly, if someone in your circle might benefit from our discussions, share this on your social media platforms. Share it far, share it wide. Word of mouth is so powerful, and we appreciate every share, tweet, or X as it is now, or post that brings new listeners into our community. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.